Thanks, Ken. So this is my talk on my journey from the Polar Explorer to Aurora. If you're expecting to build your own Aurora, you know, you're going to get all the technical details here and go home and fire up the soldering iron. I'm afraid you're going to be disappointed. There will be a couple of little tech tips in here, but this is not primarily a technical talk. This talk kind of assumes that you know what both the Polar Explorer and Aurora are. And if you don't, you can go to polex-tech.com to learn about the Polar Explorer. And you can go to the FlexRadio booth next door to find out about Aurora. So basically, this is a talk about my personal journey, not really a technical description. I have always loved radio. From birth, humans attempt to expand their sphere of influence. Kids pick up sticks as a way of extending their range of influence. Both my sons took up fencing. For me, that stick was a radio transmitter. My earliest venture into the ether was with a Heathkit SK-10, which I brought in for show and tell in second grade. It was an AM broadcast band transmitter that didn't require soldering. On a good day, if all the phonostock clips worked, it could transmit about 100 feet to an AM radio. So the journey from the Polar Explorer to Aurora was a long one, about as long as it takes for moonshine to turn into drinkable scotch. So I'm often asked, how did I come up with the idea? And it really came about as part of my ham radio journey. Back in '85, I got back on the air. I was originally licensed in '67, but you know, it was a long period of QRT, and then I got a house and was able to get back on the air, and I got an HF rig, a TS520, and HF leads to DXing, and I started working countries. And then you work a lot of countries, and then you start to run out of countries. And then on any given weekend, you might hear, oh, there's a contest on, and now there's a bunch of countries I've never heard before. So HF DXing, you know, is the gateway drug to contesting. And so then I got into contesting. And I was really hot and heavy into contesting. And then in the early 90s, kids happened. And that sort of says that your life is no longer your own. You can't commit to any kind of a schedule on any kind of a basis. So I took a little detour into boat anchor restoration. And that's the kind of thing you can work on it when you have time. You know, you can leave the project, sit on the bench, and when you get a few minutes, you can go back down and fool with it. And the thing about boat anchor restoration is that in order to try out your project after you get it working again, you're basically going to have to get on AM, because all of the old transmitters were AM transmitters. So there I am on 3885, and I'm hearing guys that have these Class E AM transmitters. This is one that was built by K1KBW. It's like a kilowatt kind of level transmitter, and they're crazy efficient. They're like 90% efficient. And I listened to these guys on AM, and I said, well, that'd be pretty cool if you could do it on sideband or FT8 or all the other modes. And it sort of seemed obvious to me that if you phase modulated the gate drive, you'd be able to do whatever you wanted. So I kind of had that idea, and I filed it away and didn't really do anything about it. So now we fast forward from the early 90s to about 2013, and I'd been elected president of the YCCC in 2011, and I had lunch with Brian K1LI before a YCCC meeting, and we got to talking about this idea, and the two of us decided to work together on the project. And so the first step in my mind was to prove the math, was to actually prove that with amplitude and phase, you could generate any signal that you wanted to. Well, like a lot of my great ideas, it turns out somebody already did it. And in this case, it was Euler who did it in 1748. So this is Euler's identity, and it's really the heart of the idea of what we call polar modulation. Polar modulation is really just a coordinate transformation. It's just another way to define a destination. You could say you're going to get someplace by telling somebody the longitude and latitude, or you could say, you could give them a direction and a distance. You could say, take a compass course of 330 degrees for 2 miles and you'll get to a specific point. So that's the idea behind polar modulation. We have a lot of fancy math for the math heads, and that's cool. And then, Brian and I thought we'd invented something, and it turns out, again, we didn't. The whole idea of using polar modulation, or what he called envelope elimination and restoration, was written up by Leonard Kahn in 1952. So this is just a point that many ideas and patents are before their time, and many of them never get developed. So when I worked at HP and Philips, there was a bonus program. If you wrote a patent, you got some chunk of change. So I wrote patents as fast as I could, and probably 2/3 of my patents are pretty decent ideas that have never been developed. And in this case, Kahn's idea was a great idea, but it was ahead of its time. And it really took solid state physics and advanced DSP to make it work. So there's a tip in there. If you're looking for a project, something cool to work on, get ChatGPT to look up old patents and find ones that were ahead of their time. So Brian and I decided to build a working prototype to prove feasibility. And we prototyped it with small building blocks. I'm fiddling in my pocket for a laser pointer, but I'm not finding one. Anyway, so this was our very first working model, and it's Rev A, and it's built with all kinds of little circuit boards, which make it really easy if you need to change something, or if something doesn't work, you can redo a part of it without completely redoing all of it. It used a microchip development kit. It used a couple of boards from an I0CG project, which later became the ELAD FDM Duo radio. So that's where we had our digital up converter. Other boards we did ourselves using PCB Express, which is really great. You can do a 2.5 by 3.5 circuit board, 2-layer, and free tools. You push the button, the boards are in your hand about a week later, and it's $50. Maybe it's a little more now. So we built Rev A, and it worked. It did 40 watts on 40 meters. It was class E, and it was ahead of its time because it had pre-distortion. Our motto was to be loud and clean. And then Brian came up with a great name for the project, the Polar Explorer, and we wrote a QAX article about it. And we presented the whole thing and demonstrated it at a YCCC meeting in February of 2016. So remember, you heard it here first. At that meeting, a couple of people whose opinion I respect greatly, Tom K1KI and Chuck W1HIS, gave us some really positive comments about the concept and the design. And I filed away those emails, and a lot of times they were a source of encouragement to me to keep going on the project. So I want to thank Tom and Chuck for making their comments when they did. So we started to realize the advantages of this technique in terms of size, weight, power, and cost. But there's a little bit of extra baggage that goes along with it. You need a little bit more signal processing. You need to find a way to generate the modulation voltage. And so it turns out that there was a break point on the feasibility in terms of power. If you wanted to do a 100-watt version, it probably wouldn't make economic sense, and it wouldn't save a lot of space. It would still save some power if that's what you're after. But I figured that it really had to hit about 500 watts before it started to make sense. So that was kind of the bogey for the next stage of the project. So this is a complicated slide, and basically this slide attempts to condense a 20-minute talk into a single slide. I did give the 20-minute version at the ARRL a couple of weeks ago. Basically, amplifier classes are described by letters A, B, C, and so forth. And in the linear classes, which is A, B, and C, power is being dissipated in the device. So if you have a tube or a transistor which is generating your output, it's almost always dissipating power in the device itself. And so therefore they're not 100% efficient. And as you go to higher letters, things get more and more efficient. So a class C amplifier could be 70% efficient or so. A class A amplifier might only be 40% efficient. What you give up as you go up in letters is linearity. So a class A amplifier is very linear, which means you get a very good copy of what you put in when that's what's coming out. And then as you go up in the letters, the linearity starts to deteriorate until when you get to D and above, basically the amplifier stage is either on or off, and that means two things. It means you're going to get excellent efficiency because now the device that you're using to control the output is never partially conducting. It's either on or off, and in both of those cases, it dissipates no power. But what you give up is any ability to control the amplitude. The amplitude that comes out is now defined by the power supply. And so to get high efficiency, you basically have to give up any ability to do amplitude control with the input signal. Well, if you look at the math, it turns out that polar modulation provides exactly the two signals that you need to drive a high efficiency amplifier. It splits the signal that you're giving it into an amplitude component, which we can convert that into the drain voltage on the amplifier, and a phase component, which we control with the gate drive. So there's your 20-minute talk in one slide. So at this point, I started to have the vision. I started to see what this could do and what this could be. I saw that it could revolutionize ham radio transmitters. But to do that, I realized it had to be a commercial success as a product. It couldn't just be a QEX article. And there was one other thing that it had to do that I'll tell you about at the end. So there were major hurdles to get from 40 watts on 40 meters to 500 watts on all the HF ham bands. The first thing was trying to get the power up there, and in order to do that, I had to find some different semiconductor devices, and the critical parameters that mattered in this case aren't in the data sheets, and they're not in the simulations. And so basically, I just ordered every FET I could find out of the Mauser catalog and spent one summer trying them all until I found the ones that worked. It's sort of like if you've seen the movie about Tom Edison when he's doing the light bulb, and he's trying everything he can think of for the filament of the light bulb. It's like, I have no clue what I'm doing here. I'll just try everything. And fortunately, I found the magic ones that work, and no, I'm not going to tell you what they are. Then we had to find a way to make it band switch so it could cover all the HF bands. Well, Class E amplifiers have a very particular output tank circuit, which is very frequency specific. So one thing that made it a little bit easier to do band switching was to go to a Class D amplifier. And so then I worked on a way to do band switching, and it took about 2 days to invent it, and it took about 2 years to make it work the right way. We also had to come up with a thermal solution. So the parts that I ended up with are very small, there's a hint, and even with high efficiency, we still had to figure out a way to get 125 watts of heat out of those little tiny parts. And it turned out that the solution was to solder the parts directly to a small piece of copper, and then interface that small piece of copper to a bigger piece of copper, and then finally put that bigger piece of copper on a big heatsink. And that way, each thermal interface, the first one is solder, which is very good, and then all the next ones are getting bigger and bigger, so they're easier and easier to give you a good thermal performance. So those are some of the major hurdles that we had to get through to get to 500 watts in all the bands. So often I had to stop what I was working on and go back to school to teach myself some new RF skills. I thought I knew my way around ham radio pretty good, but I had no formal RF training. All my EE was self-taught. I had one college course in circuit theory, which I took pass-fail. So I had a lot more to learn. A whole lot of it was new territory. There's very little information about Class D amplifiers on the internet. And so I basically had to develop the understanding as I went along. I was basically writing the book on HF Class D PAs. And a lot of times it was hard to tell if it was just something I was missing, something I hadn't learned, something I hadn't been exposed to, or if I was really breaking new ground, if I was really originating new material. And so after I smoked my first set of FETs, I started keeping lab notes. And I ended up filling 22 lab notebooks. Each one is about 100 pages. And the reason they're 100 pages long is because my word processor would crash at about 100 pages. So Brian and I came up with Rev-C. This one demonstrated 500 watts on all HF bands. This one was kind of cool because it had PC liquid cooling. If you look in here, you can see some water hoses and a radiator on the back, and it actually used a liquid cooling from the PC, the gamers, the overclockers. And Brian and I pitched the idea to a couple of ham radio related companies. I won't mention any names, but we didn't get any bites. So now I'm going to give you a couple of freebie tech tips if you think you're going to design your own Aurora. So one of them is that there is this really cool family of parts from Analog Devices, and I use the ADAU 1452. It's basically an audio DSP chip, and you can get versions of them that have codecs and DACs on them. The 1452 it doesn't actually have either of those, but it has a lot more processing power. And you can download the software tools called Sigma Studio from Analog Devices for free. And it allows you to just basically drag and drop DSP blocks, hook them together with wires, and build your own DSP stuff. It's all audio, so I think the maximum sample rate is 192 kilosamples per second. But you can still do a whole lot of stuff with it. So for example, Brian and I, in like an afternoon, each of us independently, took a 1452 development kit and made it the back end of a soft rock radio. So it would take the IF from a soft rock and convert it into upper sideband or lower sideband audio. So I did baseband, sideband generation, I did the polar conversion, I did controlled envelope single sideband, which is a form of speech processing. The bottom chain here is all the control logic, the PTT stuff, TX transmit equalization. I did all that in this DSP chip. So I'd recommend that if you're thinking of doing some DSP. The next one is some tips for RF filter design. If you're going to do an RF filter, you probably want to use a 2 or a 4 layer board. What I found is you put the inductors on the top side and you put surface mount capacitors on the bottom side. You can see if you put the capacitors and the inductors on the same side and you need to change a capacitor, it's really hard to get to because you got to weed your way down in between all the inductors. So by putting the capacitors on the back side, it makes it easy to tweak and change them as you're adjusting the performance of the filter. The other thing is to lay out, this board is actually a 7-band low-pass filter for the output of the PA, and each of the filters is basically a generic topology. So it's a capacitor input low pass filter, but it also has cower caps across the inductors, and so it provides for multiple capacitors at each capacitor location. So you can use common values and add them up to get a specific value that you want. So there's your second tech tip. So because of the tight integration with the DSP that polar modulation requires, it really makes more sense for this whole project to be a transmitter and not an amplifier. And that's one of the hardest things to communicate to people. People look at it and say, oh, it's an amplifier, or the radio's a radio with an amplifier in it. No, it's a transmitter. And so you could build an amplifier, and that's kind of what Leonard Kahn's original idea was. But trying to build an amplifier is sort of like trying to build a repeater. You basically have to receive and demodulate the signal so that you can separate it into envelope and phase, and then use it to drive the PA stage. So it makes more sense to be integrated as a transmitter than try to make it into an amplifier. And so I did not want to develop a receiver or a UI. I wasn't interested in making a transceiver. So I came up with the idea of a companion transmitter, which was RevF. And basically the idea here is that this box would be the place where you connect your key and your microphone, and it would connect via CAT connections, serial ports, to your existing radio. And it would take over the complete transmit function side by side with your existing radio, but it would give you 500 watts of high efficient RF output. So a couple of friends helped me. Jeff Bale, NT1K, came up with a prototype case. Jeff Struven, N1RD, helped develop the software to interface with all existing radios, basically used HamLive. And we had to provide the capability to connect this box to your transceiver. And when you do that, it would automatically follow the frequency and mode that you pick on your transceiver. But what if you wanted to interface a computer to all of this for contesting or for FD8? So we had to provide a second CAT port, and we had to provide a transport mechanism so that second CAT port would appear as a radio to the computer. So that was really complicated stuff. Well, along about 2018, Brian and I parted ways. We parted on good terms. He had some different ideas and he wanted to pursue them himself. And so at this point, I was on my own. And I pretty much had a choice at this point. I either had to find a company to work with, or I had to form my own company. Because remember, I'm still believing that in order to make this really change ham radio, it has to be a commercial success. And I hated the idea of forming my own company. I'm not a bean counter. I can't stand dealing with, the business side of business. I'm the R&D side. So I decided to put together a road show, and I did that, and I took it to Dayton in 2019. My goal was really to find a commercial partner. I built up this booth with all these posters and things that told my story. I worked on my elevator speech. Does everybody know what an elevator speech is? A lot of nodding heads. Marty and N1C shared a room with me because I was a late entrant into the Dayton crowd. Ed, K1EP, carried a suitcase full of crap for me out there because I couldn't get this all on the plane, and he was driving out. At the last minute, the best I could do was to get a table in the tents. And before I went, I sent blind emails to everybody I could think of, and every company I could come up with any email addresses for, all of the opinion leaders like Rob Sherwood and so forth. And a couple emails I wasn't able to find, like Gerald Youngblood, the CEO of FlexRadio. So I just guessed, and I guessed right. So I'm at the booth, and it's pretty good traffic going by, and a lot of people are coming by, and about half the people, oh yeah, that's kind of cool, yeah. And a lot of people, like, they just glazed over, like, what is that? Some people got it, some people didn't. So Saturday morning, Tom, N1MM, comes by my booth, and he says, hey, did the FlexRadio guys come by yet? And I'm thinking, that's a funny question for him to ask. But later Saturday afternoon, Steve Hicks, who was the CTO of Flex, did come by. And he heard my elevator speech, and he got it. So I talked to Steve quite a bit, and he was interested. And then the next morning, before the show actually opened, I went and talked to Gerald. Gerald gave me the secret to working with Flex. He said, we like to work with people who are smart and humble. Smart, I was sure I could do, but anybody who worked with me when I was a young engineer would know that humble was not my style. It turns out there was a third quality that I was going to need, and that was patience. So we set up a meeting in Austin. I flew down with Polex, as I call it, as my carry-on. I made my pitch. What I didn't really realize at the time is that what I was asking for was for Flex to invest a lot of money in my idea. It never occurred to me. It's like, hey, this is cool, let's do it. You know? Never mind the fact that it was going to cost a ton of dough. So I spent 2 days down there, and we did a lot of lab testing on the prototype. You know, stuff like, does it make the power? Does it do upper sideband? You know, what are the harmonics like? All this stuff. And we saved the toughest test for last. And that was that we had the thing running 500 watt output into a dummy load, and we shorted the output with a screwdriver. And lo and behold, the radio shut down. It came back up and actually survived. I was amazed. I kept a straight face. Yeah, oh yeah, it's supposed to do that. So things were looking good. Flex asked for it to do 6 meters, which I just thought was impossible. And they said it probably needed to have 60 dBc harmonic suppression for sales in Europe. So I would then have to probably go from a 5-pole low-pass filter to a 7-pole. But, and what I asked for was I asked for it to say something like Polex inside, like Intel inside, but Polex inside. I wanted to show the link. I wanted to demonstrate that this was a Ham's bench project that turned into some kind of, I hope, a commercial success. Because I wanted to support the stated reasons for the existence of ham radio in Part 97. So I asked for a 3-year time limit. I thought realistically we could get the project out in 2, and we made a plan to work together. I flew home. I kind of went back to work on the bench. I found a way to get it to actually work on 6 meters. So I couldn't quite get 500 watts, but I could get 200 watts on 6 meters, so we could check the box. And then I had Rich Smith, W1EZ here, help me with the legal documents, figured out all the ins and outs and the loopholes. So a lot of loopholes. So on October 1st, 2019, I was vacationing in Disney World. I got up really early, took the boat over to the Contemporary where they have a business center, and they faxed me the agreement, I signed the agreement, faxed it back, and we were in business. Very soon after that, Flex won a big Air Force contract, which was, as they say at Flex, a rose and a thorn. It was a huge growth opportunity, but it immediately sucked up all their resources. So this basically caused a multi-year delay in Aurora development, and that's really where I had to learn patience. Even so, I kept on working. I kept on improving the design. I found a thermal runaway problem and solved it. I continued working on the math, which is pretty mind-blowing math. So the PA is actually a digital transmitter. All of the signals into the PA are TTL. And the PA synthesizes the output waveform at the full output power level. There's no pre-driver, there's no 10-watt stage. We're making 500 watts right from the get-go. There are no narrow filters that follow it. Most radios, they would synthesize the RF, and they'd have like a crystal filter to really make sure there's nothing outside of the band. So this means that there's some pretty weird math going on. So if you look at the spectrum of the two signals that go to the PA, the one on the left is the envelope, and you can see that it has products that fall off gradually. The one on the right is the phase, and it has products that fall off gradually, and they both basically go on to infinity. Those get multiplied in the PA, and for those of you who are into DSP, multiplication in time domain is convolution in the frequency domain. So basically those two spectra are getting convolved, and the result is a spectrum that has a finite output width. So these are for a two-tone test. And so that's some pretty weird math. So while I was waiting for the resources to come on, I figured, well, I might as well help out Flex with some other stuff. You know, the more I can do to help them get their projects done, maybe I can get some resources sooner. So I worked on automatic pre-distortion with them, which leveraged some of the work that we had done early on in the Polar Explorer. And I helped them identify a thermal runaway issue, which is a lot like the thermal runaway issue I had seen in Polex, but theirs is on a 5 kilowatt commercial amplifier. And over time, almost invisibly, I became integrated into FlexRadio, like one of their own engineers, but not really. I did find some time along this time, this is like 2022, to restore my wife's 1952 Seeburg M100C jukebox. The picture on the left is before, and that's January of 2022, and the picture on the right is after, and that's December of 2022. And I can't claim to have done the woodwork on it. I did hire that out, but I did all the mechanics in it, and it was a fascinating project. It's amazing to see how they did things in 1952. It actually has a 100-bit memory in there that remembers what records you selected. So that's pretty cool. I continued to develop the concept. I built a bunch of circuit boards in PCB Express, and we integrated it into a 6000 series radio. I was able to get just enough support from Flex so that they could modify the radio to export the transmit data, and the transmit data went to my outboard DSP, which drove the PA. And so there's a 3-board set. There's the power amplifier, a low-pass filter, and an antenna tuner. Here's a top view of it with a lot of wires and stuff. So these boards up here are that's a Raspberry Pi there, and this is my translator board with the DSP chip on it. So 3 years came and went, and extended the agreement for another 3 years. And then the Flex had to work on the 8000 series. If you followed Flex, you know they had the 6000 series, and then a year ago, Dayton, they came out with the 8000 series. And the target platform for Aurora moved from the 6000 to the 8000, and the 8000 included some vital infrastructure for Aurora's processing and stuff. And then finally, after the 8000 was released, some resources started coming on. Some mechanical engineering resources helped develop the final thermal solution and the hardware mods to the chassis. Software resources came on to start integrating the design into the radio software. And FPGA resources came on to implement the polar modulation algorithms in the FPGA of the radio. We started building prototypes for software development and alpha testing. I designed the 3 real boards for the RF stack using in-house tools, designed it using Altium, so that was a learning experience for me. So this is kind of what my shack looks like. I basically transitioned from all ICOM radios to all Flex radios. And during COVID, most of my contesting became remote operators. I still had a few folks in, and when I'd have a guest op come in, I'd have to spend a couple days before the contest and clean up all the Flex stuff and put it away or hide it under a blanket, and then they'd come in and operate, and I'd have to take all that crap out again. And that got kind of old. So for this contest season, 24 to 25, basically I went all remote. Told my operators, yep, we're going to operate, but everybody's got to be remote. And that worked great because they all converted to using my FlexRadio, and came up with a pretty airtight remote operating scenario for them where they can control antennas and rotators and all that stuff. And I had a PGXL, so we could operate 1,500 watts. What my remote operators didn't know is that this contest season, when it was my shift, I was running Aurora. So they were running 1,500 watts, and I was running 500 watts. Didn't seem to make much difference. I was still bagging them pretty good. So it's fully integrated into the 8000 platform. An external marketing company came up with the Aurora name, the logo, the marketing concepts, the video, and by now you know that we introduced Aurora at Dayton in 2025. So I'm going to put the microphone next to the computer. Sorry about that. So in 4 short days, a vision of 12 years became a reality and then a memory. It was like taking the checkered flag in an F1 car. Dayton 2025 is now history, and I believe that history was made that weekend by everyone at Flex. So they say, be careful what you wish for. Now we had made a promise to the world, and it's time to deliver. So we're still working real hard, particularly this guy here, to get Aurora into production. Why did I keep at it? There's a subtle difference between passion and obsession, and I probably crossed that line a few times. You might think that working for a ham radio company is a dream job. It is, but maybe not so much in a lot of ways. I had very little time for just spontaneous hamming outside of contests. I was working on this project pretty much full time. Once I signed the agreement with Flex, there was a very real concern that folks who knew about the Polar Explorer, if they knew I was associated with Flex, would put 2 and 2 together and kind of anticipate what was going on. Aurora itself was actually one of the best kept secrets. So let's take a look at how far we've come. One of the first commercial signal sideband rigs to come out, and it was actually a 500 watt rig just like Aurora, was the Collins Gold Dust Twins, the KWS-1 and the 75A4. They were introduced in about 1955. And so if we do a comparison, in 1957 dollars, they cost $2,790, which, accounting for inflation, is now $32,000. They required 1,500 watts AC power input, and they did make 500 watts PEP output, and they weighed 245 pounds. So
That's a deal breaker.
the entry-level Aurora sells for $6,200. It requires about 625 watts input. It does make 500 watts out, and it weighs 18 pounds. So if you set out to build a 500 watt station today, you could do it in two ways. You could buy an HF radio on the left, and a 500 watt amplifier, and a 500 watt tuner, and a power supply. Or on the right, you could buy an Aurora. They both make 500 watts output. The weight on the left is 47 pounds, on the right is 18 pounds. Input power is 1350 watts on the left. We haven't come very far from the Goldust twins, have we? You know? On the right is 625 watts. The excess heat generated, key down, is 800 watts on the left and 125 watts on the right. The input voltage is 11.3 amps on the left, 5.2 amps on the right. And the cost is $9,000 on the left and $7,600 on the right. Just to mention it, basically, because we've improved the efficiency from 50% to 80%, you need that much less power supply, heat sink, and fan to deal with the heat. You've reduced the wasted power considerably. So the Aurora radio uses exactly the same heat sink and fan as the 8000 radio. So Flex is a fantastic company. Their mission statement is, "We exist to enrich lives." I've seen it from the inside. Sometimes they make mistakes and stumble, but they always try hard. And they're great people, every single one of them. There's no one in this picture that I would replace. And sometimes I see really witless criticism on the internet, and it just hurts me, it bugs me, because it's obviously born out of ignorance. But the haters gotta hate. So why did I keep at it? I'm very grateful for ham radio. I wanted to pay it back for the fun I've had, and pay it forward so future hams can have fun too. A lot of guys want to work 100 countries or 3,000 counties. I wanted to tick all 5 boxes in Part 97. I've been a member of the Emergency Communication Volunteers in my town since I moved in. I believe contesting ticks the third box of advancing skills in communications and technology. I believe that I have done my best to expand the reservoir of operators and experts. Happy to say that recently my family became a full house as my last son to get his license got his license just a couple of weeks ago. Certainly contesting and DXing supports international goodwill. But I saw this as my opportunity to check the box about contributing to the radio art. So the true measure of success will be not just when we sell a lot of Auroras, but when a competitor appears. I give it 2 years. Hopefully for Flex's sake, it'll be more like 6. The fact that it's out there and it's an existence proof means that companies like ICOM or Elecraft they now feel better about committing resources, i.e. money, to develop a competing product. So that's almost the end of my talk. There are some people that I want to say thank you to. You notice that I might have used the pronoun we a lot of times in this presentation. And first we means Brian and I, and then later we means Flex and I. And although I had the driving passion for the project, I didn't do it alone. So I have a ham friend who has helped with the Polar Explorer and Aurora since the very beginning. This friend has been a sounding board for ideas, an advisor and counselor all along the length of the project. Keep it together. Supporting and encouraging me to keep going, even on those days that were filled with sparks and smoke. This friend is my best friend, my wife, Michelle, N1XJA. More than anyone else, she sacrificed her time with me so I could chase this crazy dream. She had faith in me when I had lost faith in myself. And if you appreciate what I've been able to accomplish here, please join me in thanking Michelle for so generously giving up our time together. This is as much her success as mine. So hopefully the next few of these will be easier. I want to thank Steve Hicks. Steve, in his role as CTO, ever on the lookout for new technologies and opportunities, came to my booth in the tent 6 years ago to hear my spiel. He got it in a heartbeat and was able to take up the vision of disruptive change that it could be. From that moment, Steve has been my champion on the inside, always carrying the banner of innovation while cloaked in common sense. Gerald Youngblood. Gerald was the original CEO of FlexRadio and is now CEO Emeritus and Chairman of the Board. Flex wasn't immediately able to support development on Aurora, so to get to that point sooner, I worked with Gerald on other FlexRadio projects and products. Working with Gerald was just plain great fun. His enthusiasm and curiosity shine incredibly brightly for someone my age. One of the first things I was struck by was Gerald's willingness and ability to learn new things. While I've known him, he's taught himself Python and is now a super user of ChatGPT. He's still learning and enjoying every minute of it. Brian, K1LI. Brian McChesney. Designs can be developed in a vacuum, but it takes a lot longer, and the designs tend to be inbred. Forged over lunch before a YCCC meeting, our collaboration lasted 5 years. During that time, we planned, schemed, conspired, agreed, disagreed, challenged, debated, and analyzed in detail a lot of the underlying principles and circuit elements. We communicated in engineer speak, utilizing the bond of a common language. We wrote the seminal QEX article and made 2 presentations on our progress to YCCC. After 5 years, we went in different directions, parting as friends, but our working together gave the germ of an idea a good start. And finally, Matt Youngblood, who is now the CEO of FlexRadio and everyone at Flex. After working for the monoliths of HP and Philips, the environment at Flex was a breath of fresh air. I am continually amazed at how well the entire company functions as a team. In order to grow, a seed must fall on fertile soil. I can't imagine any better place for this crazy idea of mine to have fallen. Thank you, FlexRadio. So that's the end of my prepared material. I'll take any questions.
I saw the demo holding a brick on the key, CW 500 watts, all the way along. It said use rating FCA, no problem. But the spec sheet claims that AM is at, I think, 125 watts.
Right, so AM, the peak output is 500 watts, but the AM carrier level is 125 watts. That's just the standard AM math.
Okay. So it'll talk like a 500 watt transmitter.
If you're rating it in terms of peak output, yes.
One more question.
So you mentioned that through this, in the project, you taught yourself and you wrote your own book on class D actions. So for your second contribution to Hamden, will you publish a book or what do you learn?
Oh, that would be a lot of work. It's,
That would be-
all of the information is in the notes, but it's nowhere close to a book. It would take a lot of work to actually convert it into a book.
E-book.
Yeah.
Okay,
All right.
thank you much. Again, great. Tony.